everyone, welcome to the 6th episode of Sewing 101. In this video, I'll be showing you 3 different blind hems. A regular blind hem, a catch stitch, and a blind catch stitch. These are all sewn by hand and they cannot be done with the sewing machine. This is a great skill to have because if you have some formal pants or skirts, they're all sewn with the blind hem and you wouldn't want your stitching to show on formal clothing. You're going to need a sewing machine to sew a stay stitch. Stay stitches are sewn on collars, the hem of the skirt, and the waist of the skirt because you wouldn't want your fabric to stretch while you're working on sewing your clothing, and because if you're trying to sew a skirt waist into a waistband and the skirt ends up being a little bit too big than the waistband, you can easily pull the stitchings on the stay stitch and it can fit inside the waistband. A stay stitch and a base stitch are kind of similar, except a base stitch is a wide stitch length and has no knots, and a stay stitch is a regular 10 to 12 stitches per inch with knots. I hope you enjoy this video and practice these techniques because they're a great skill to have if you're going to sew clothing. If you want to learn how to use a sewing machine, I have a video for that, so you can check that out in the description box, and I'll also link the first episode of the Sewing 101 series so you can get a feeling of what this is about and you can learn some cool things before you learn the other episode. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to be updated on more of these series and some other crafty videos. And thumbs up this video if you found it helpful. You will need a needle and thread and a piece of fabric as big as you want depending on how much you want to practice. Fold the edge 1 1/4 inch wrong sides together. Fold the edge inside 1/4 of an inch. Use the warmth of your hands to press it. Next, thread your needle. A fast and easy way to knot the end of your thread is by wrapping it around your index finger 3 times and rolling it with your thumb and index finger and pulling. If your knot is too big, you can always trim the end of it. Place the needle through the seam allowance. If you are right-handed, you'll be sewing from right to left and vice versa. Now that your knot is in between the seam allowance, on the body of the fabric, place the needle through 1 to 2 grains of thread. Place the needle right next to the other thread and about 1/4 of an inch, thread it inside the seam allowance. Right below the thread on the body of the fabric, again pick up 1 or 2 grains of thread. Again, place the needle through the seam allowance right next to the other thread and go through it about 1/4 of an inch. Make sure you're not picking up the front of the fabric, only the seam allowance. By the way, I'm using a dark thread because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing, but if you're going to be doing this on a piece of clothing, then you would use the colored thread to match your fabric. See how even with the dark thread, it still looks blind. Continue picking up 1 or 2 grains of thread and going back next to the other thread and through the seam allowance 1/4 of an inch. This is how it looks in the inside of the seam allowance. To end your hem, after you picked up 1 grain on the body, place the needle through the seam allowance, going the opposite direction, and place the needle through the loop to create a knot, and make 1 more knot. I would sew a blind hem on pants or skirts with thicker material. Now that you made 2 knots, place the needle through the seam allowance right next to the thread and create a tail about 1 inch away. Place the needle through the seam allowance only and pull the thread until the knot is hiding inside the seam. Trim the thread and hide the tail inside. Leaving a tail is important because it secures your stitchings and it won't unravel in the future. And that is how you sew a blind hem. Take a piece of fabric about 7 by 7 or bigger and create 2 stay stitches on the opposite sides. Sew the stay stitches 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edges. Fold one side wrong sides together about 1 inch. Take the end of your thread and wrap it around your finger 3 times and roll it between your thumb and your index finger and pull the end of the thread to make a knot. For the catch stitch, for right-handers, you'll be starting from left to right and left-handers from right to left. Place the needle through the seam allowance so the knot is under the seam allowance. On the body of the fabric, pick up 1 or 2 grains of thread for right-handers going to the left. Your stitchings will be about 1/2 inch spaced apart. On the seam allowance, right on the stay stitch, pick up 1/8 of an inch going to the left, if you're right-handed like me. As you can see, your stitchings will create a crisscross pattern. Pick up a grain or 2 on the body going to the left. Then place your needle through the seam allowance about 1/8 of an inch. Continue practicing as much as you want. To finish your stitchings, on your last stitch on the seam allowance, create another stitch right next to it and place the needle through the loop. Make 2 knots. Place the needle right next to the knot and place the needle through the seam allowance to make a tail. Pull the thread taut until the knot is hiding inside the seam allowance. If you're hemming a skirt and you would like the skirt to be light and flowy, then I would prefer doing a catch stitch instead of the blind hem. Because of the 2 folds on the blind hem, it can be a little too heavy on lighter fabrics, but this is just your preference. So that's how you sew a catch stitch. A blind catch stitch is just like a regular catch stitch, except you're going to fold the raw edge down so only the stay stitch is showing. Knot the end of your thread the same way. Place the needle through the seam allowance less than 1/8 of an inch so the knot is inside the seam allowance. Place the needle through the body of the fabric and pick up 1 to 2 grains of thread. Your stitches will be about 1/2 an inch spaced apart. Place your needle through 1/8 of an inch on one layer of the seam allowance. Pick up a grain or 2 on the body of the fabric. Now pick up 1/8 of an inch on the seam allowance through one layer. Continue practicing as much as you want. To finish your stitchings will be the same way as the other times, so just loop your needle through the loop. Now place your needle through the seam allowance and make your tail. And that is how you sew a blind catch stitch. If you ever noticed when you try to sew a hem on skirts or pants and it creates this little loop and it's not flat, well, this is how you fix it. Use a needle or a pin and pull the thread on the stay stitch inside the raw edges of the hem. Pull as many threads as you need to. Now you want to ease out the stretch so it's flat like the body of the fabric. This is so if you're sewing on a sewing machine, it won't create any unwanted folds. At this point, you're ready to sew any hem you'd like, whether it's on a machine or a blind hem. Thank you so much for watching and don't forget to subscribe.